welcome back to the Pop Cult Online Power Hour, the video podcast dedicated to the 10-year-old in all of us. And I'm your host, Rick Gord. The all-new Aquaman, dollar comics, big comics, and more, right after these messages.
Now, all the excitement of a penny arcade game is yours in Grand Prix, the most realistic electronic racing game ever invented. Grand Prix looks and sounds so true to life, you can feel the tension. It takes driving skill and lightning reflexes. One wrong turn and wipe out. It's a real penny arcade game, and you don't need a TV set to play.
Over 8 laps in 30 seconds.
Pretty fast, but not fast enough.
Grand Prix from Mego.
Hello, I'm Larry Kane, and this is a news check from Channel 7 Eyewitness News.
One picture disc and record. Other scenes your pack sold separately by Vanity Fair.
Star Wars figures. R2-D2. Chewbacca, Luke, and Princess Leia. They're the Star Wars Early Bird set of figures. These 4 action figures are not yet available, but this Star Wars Early Bird certificate package is in stores with this colorful Star Wars picture display stand and certificate to send in to get a set of 4 figures by mail. They'll be sent to you at home between February 1st and June 1st. The Star Wars Early Bird certificate package, new from Kenner.
Video chat with the Gordon.
Hey, my buddy. There we go. How's it going?
Very good. So, have you seen the Savage Aquaman picture burning up the internet?
Yeah, I'm not opposed to it. Of all the characters in the comic world that really needs a drastic makeover, I think he's one of them. It would have been nice, to see him in the green tights and the orange shirt, but I don't know if it would have translated very well to the big screen. I mean, animated, sure.
If they had done some kind of like instead of all the tattoos and stuff, they could have done like a dark bronze kind of like scale mail kind of shirt, right? Mm-hmm. And that would have been a little, and just even dark green pants or something would not have looked terrible. Well, but I don't know.
Keep in mind that this is the first time he's been brought to the screen. Now, we all know it's never going to stay the same. Look at all the costume changes that Superman and Batman go through with every film. The costumes are a little different.
That's true. They can't. Well, they need to make a new action figure for every movie, right?
Exactly. So, yeah, just think of it that way. This is the first iteration. They're already getting a massive backlash against it. So, you can look forward to the next one being toned down a little more in line with what we're used to. I mean,
sorry, go ahead.
I mean, look at the nonsense with the Wonder Woman wearing pants, and the hullabaloo over that was just amazing. The internet is just crazy.
Well, I don't know about the backlash though, because certain fan circles are backlashing against it, mm-hmm. and I myself am not thrilled about it, but I kind of step back from it and say, okay, I don't personally like it, but that doesn't mean that it's bad per se. I mean, I've seen a lot of people who are speaking out saying, oh, that's cool, and I've never thought I'd like Aquaman, and that is the audience. I mean, if you think of it, of people who know what Aquaman should look like from the comics, mm-hmm. and, don't, like, hold him in low regard, is like this little tiny number of people like this. And people who either don't know what Aquaman looks like at all, or thought he always looked like a goof before, and now he looks kind of badass, and he's gonna like take that big trident and stick it up some bad guy's backside and, dance all over their head. Those guys, that's who's going to go and pay money to see the movie. That's who Hollywood is trying to appease with this look.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they're being successful, because if I go to some places, you got like your hardcore fanboys of like, I don't like this. And again, personally, I think he looks like, it's like, well, with dark hair, but he's like going back to 1990s Aquaman.
Exactly.
He just needs to have a hook hand on him.
Exactly.
And when they did that in the 90s, it was the same kind of a thing. He had a longer run with Peter David in the 90s with the hook hand and in Morrison's Justice League than probably any other incarnation of Aquaman that ever ran.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's a certain element of the fan base that's going to like a wilder looking, take no prisoners, kick ass kind of look. And, a lot of people, women included, that I'm seeing are like,
yeah.
I don't care. It's Khal Drogo and he looks sexy and I like that. And it's, that's who I think in that respect it's successful, because it's the same as when they make over these comics in a certain way that, if they piss off this small number of hardcore fans, and in doing so, they open up and get 10 times that number of other people, they have been successful at what their business is, and their business is selling more product, putting more asses in seats.
Right.
It's not in appeasing an older fan base. And, I'm part of that older fan base. And, it's just like DC. I don't get that hardly. I don't get any DC books right now, other than Vertigo books. But that's okay, because I'm not who DC is trying to appeal to.
Right.
There's a lot of people who, when they heard, maybe they're going to get rid of the New 52, they're like, oh, that's a real bummer, because that's the old, I started reading DC on that. And it's like, the people who drifted away from DC are this middle ground. You got your hardcore, John Mayo, Mike Myers, some of these guys. Man, they could do anything to those characters, and those guys are still going to be hardcore DC fans.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing is going to chase those guys away.
Right.
And then you got the new crop who you switch things up and you throw away a bunch of continuity and you get them excited about it. As long as it grows, that's a win now.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that it started out really big, and then the numbers have dwindled and dwindled and dwindled. Now it's 3 years later and they're kind of doing a little bit of I don't know what kind of a reboot they're doing now, but hopefully they'll be successful with it and get more people buying their comics.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up, because I never really had given it much thought about kicking the hornet's nest, as it were, to get to the honey. Now, yeah, the vocal minority are going to be, your hardcore guys out there. But yeah, that's going to generate, because I've had people who were texting me this picture in disbelief, saying, this is so cool. And these were people that don't read comics, that go to the movies, and, they're asking me questions. Is this the same Aquaman, from Super Friends, or,
Yeah.
So they did their job correctly. They got a marketing buzz started. And then I started thinking about it. It's like, Aquaman's been around. He's a Golden Age character, and I don't think people realize that. But he hit really big in the 60s, because it was the Superman Aquaman hour. People don't remember that.
Yeah.
He was a big deal for a long time.
Right.
And he was never really, in my view, not a particularly strong character, although I really did enjoy his book, the Jim Aparo book back in the 60s, which I thought was fantastic. And again, Peter David's run. And, the new 52 version I really enjoyed also. But it's a tough character, but we'll have to wait and see.
I mean, they do cool things with it. It's just the movie audience is a different audience, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you got to do a different thing with them, and I think appealing to the general, it's going to be, if you can successfully appeal to the general public while alienating 50 to 75% of the comic book fans, that is a massive win.
It's sad but true.
Because if you got every single person who reads any kind of comic book to go out on opening night to see a superhero movie, and that's the only people that saw the superhero movie, it would be a disastrous failure of a movie.
Mm-hmm.
It just, there is not the numbers, so you're going to get some amount of the comic book fans will like it regardless.
Mm-hmm.
It's like Man of Steel. I don't know. We thought, I mean, I didn't care for that movie, but a lot of people liked it. And I don't think it did bad just because I didn't like it, and I don't have to like it, know?
Right. See, that's the thing people seem to forget. Just because you and I are comic fans doesn't mean we have to automatically like any comic-generated media that's out there.
I will generally, yeah. I'll go see anything that's comic. I mean, I went and saw Superman.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't like it, and I didn't go back and see it 10 times or something,
But I mean, we've brought it up before. We grew up in almost a depression era in terms of comic content. We had the comics, and that was it. That was it. Some cartoons, and some when we got to the late 70s, things started to get a little better, but not much.
Well, I mean, it was interesting because, we would watch Spider-Man flinging his cargo net and getting towed up the side of a building on a giant rope. And, I ate that up.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd see Linda Carter spinning around in her red, white, and blue bathing suit, and you'd see Lou Ferrigno go with this crazy fright wig and green body paint. I watched that stuff. I watched every single episode of that stuff.
Not only did I watch it, I used to take the little tape recorder, hold it up to the little speaker on the TV so I could listen to it at night over and over and over again. I did that with Doctor Strange and a couple of others.
Yeah. That's,
I
think
now it's like the golden age. I mean, it's just everywhere.
Yeah, I think people get spoiled too. It's just like there are and comics are the same way. I'm on groups, on forums where people are talking about, Image, and they're like, oh, Image, they're really declining in their quality, because not every book they put out is a home run for me. And it's like, well, wait a minute. I mean, they put out like 60 books a month, and how many of them are you going to like? You shouldn't, if you liked everything that they were putting out, in my opinion, they would be doing something wrong. And that's the same way with Marvel or DC. If there's any publisher that's putting out an entire line of books and any large segment of the audience is loving everything that they're putting out, that means that they are very narrowly focused.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not being all inclusive. I mean, you got to put a variety of stuff out. And some of the stuff people will, some of the stuff you'll like and some I'll like. And, it's just different people like different things. I will like certain comics that person A likes.
Mm-hmm.
We're very similar, and we could be very similar in taste. And I'll like, the guys who review with me on Comic Spectrum, I'll use as examples, right? Sean likes something. I mean, we're on completely 100% in sync on certain things. We both love them. And then there's stuff that he likes that I'm not that big on. and I don't read. And I'm sure there's stuff that I like and he doesn't like. And the same thing with Adam, and the same thing with Hank or whoever else that's doing it. And there's never going to be 100% match between people, because you bring your own, personal set of, issues or whatever, with you to the table, that certain things will click with you and other things won't.
Well, yeah, but think about it. That was the one of the reasons for the success of the comic shops, because you didn't want to have a discussion with somebody who just agreed with everything that you thought. That's a boring conversation. You wanted to get into a conversation as to why you thought Jack of Hearts could kick Superman's ass, and your friend would argue, why that wasn't true. That's the dialogue you looked for. That's why people go there every Wednesday for that one-on-one, and that's why all of these forums and groups and Facebook, that's why it's all still going on so strongly, because we can have those conversations. It's comics is a weird thing. It's extremely personal. It is probably one of the most personal things you can do, but on the other hand, it's very communal. I mean, we do this every week. We don't get paid. I do it because I love talking to you, and I know you feel the same way.
Right.
We just happen to throw this out onto the internet so other people can enjoy it, but this is just the way this world works, and it's just the whole movie thing has got me a little weirded out, because as a comic nerd, and I'll call myself that, I get a little defensive when you've got outsiders starting to trickle in.
You know what's weird? I don't know if you notice it. You go on forums, and I noticed that, like, somebody will put up a thread about a particular book, whatever it is. It could be the current issue of Moon Knight, or the current issue of Batman, or whatever it is. Saga. Typically not Saga, because everybody tends to like that, and then if anybody doesn't, they get ganged up on. But most books, somebody will put up something and say, and they'll set the tone with, sometimes it'll be fairly neutral, like, hey, I read this book, what did other people think? And then the first couple of comments usually will set the tone for that thread.
Really?
If the first person comes on and says, I don't know, I seem to see a pattern here. I was asking if you noticed it. But if the first couple of people come on and say, yeah, I really like that book, then a lot of people will come on and talk about how they like it. If the first couple of people come on and say, man, that book sucks, then a bunch of people will come piling on about why that book sucks. And if the first few comments are mixed 50-50, then you'll actually have a fairly healthy debate about it. And other times, someone will start like a either very positive thread or very negative thread. It's like, I really think that, this guy's art sucks balls, or something like that. And it'll just be really, and then everyone starts piling on, or they come the other way.
You're absolutely right. And I mean, that's just the nature of the beast. That's something that's been like that forever and will always be like that. I spend a lot of time on Facebook, not for my friends, but I do a lot of networking. I talk to a lot of people in the industry, in the business. And nothing irritates me more than a creator participating in that type of behavior. Because there are artists and writers out there that will just... And I appreciate the fact that people want to get their opinions out there. But to come out and say something like, Man of Steel really sucked, and blah, 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 blah. As a creator, I think you have to show a little more responsibility and maybe be a little more neutral, because like you said, once you set that tone, now you've got a long, long thread on why this particular item sucks, which it may or may not. But it doesn't open up any dialogue. All it does is just promote a type of bullying, I guess.
But people like that, right?
Yeah, I know. I could go on and say this cup of coffee is the best thing I've ever had, and like you said, people start chiming in. Oh, what is it? And I'll explain, and it'll be this nice, lighthearted thing. Or I could say this cup of coffee sucks, and then it just gets really ugly. There seems to be no middle ground anymore.
It's funny because I have a real hot button about people saying such and so art or whatever is bad, or this comic is bad,
right?
Because invariably, when you say this is terrible, that is a fairly objective seeming statement, and people will always come back with their, well, of course it is implied that it should always be in my opinion, but they make this very unequivocal statement that this is terrible, as opposed to my preference is saying, well, I didn't care for this one.
Yeah, it's not your cup of tea.
It's not my cup of tea, kind of a thing, as opposed to this is bad. Because anything like any art, particularly art, is very personal taste. I mean, 10 people could look at the same piece of art. You don't know what neurons are firing in their brain and how they're appreciating that, but different people appreciate different art styles. As an example of your creator thing, I saw a creator started a thread this last week. Now, I won't name names. And he started out with the premise of, man, has Marvel really lowered the standards on what they consider to be acceptable art in the last 10 years?
Why would you say something like that as a creator? See, that really pisses me off.
And he's like, goes on to say some examples, like, man, I'm seeing things that look like wouldn't even be good enough that a high school student could do it, and just like, and then of course people are piling on, and I can imagine what they're talking about, because I don't know how many new comics you look at. Like, for instance, the Unbeatable Squirrel Girl, right? I happen to like the art in that. It's very kind of minimalist. Let's call it cartoony, although I don't necessarily like that as a shorthand. But it's by an artist who came out of the indie world, and that's the art style. And it's kind of a fun book. It's got all these asides in it. It's got a lot of humor, and I think the art style meshes with the book. But boy, it's like the farthest thing from superhero standard art that you're gonna find. It's not,
But
David
there's nothing
Finch
wrong
or
with
Tim
that.
Lee.
That's perfectly fine.
Right. But at the same time, I see people talking about that book, and they're like, oh, this is the worst art I've ever seen, and it's like, looks like a little kid did it. And all I can say is, you should really step back and look at some art that a little kid actually does, because a little kid is doing art that's as good as that art. That's some seriously talented little kid. Because I mentioned that did I mention that Alex Ross exhibit last week?
Right, yeah.
I mean, Alex Ross put up some art that he did when he was 10 years old. And Alex Ross is a fabulous artist, in my opinion. And I mean, the stuff he did when he was 10, that looked like what a 10-year-old would do. But it's certainly not as good as the art that is being published by Marvel Comics in some of these books.
So this creator that started this thread, I would imagine it wasn't somebody that's been working in the field since the Golden Age, right?
No.
Okay.
No. Those guys back then, they knew how to keep their mouth shut.
Well, they had the body of work to back it up, even if they did. If Steve Ditko jumped on Facebook and started a thread and started just whatever, love him or hate him, the guy's got a body of work that, that stands the test of time.
I try to stay away from creators talking about stuff just because I don't want it to color my enjoyment of their work. I know too many people who like can't read art by X creator because of some position they took in some online forum. Some of it is not even have anything to do with, like all the crap Orson Scott Card takes
Right.
over being Mormon, kind of supporting some of these anti-gay marriage things. And it's like, I don't approve of that. I think it should all, I believe in equality and, people love each other, marry each other, whatever.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter to me. I like Ender's Game, and I'm not going to stop liking Ender's Game because of some personal political position that Orson Scott Card took.
I look at all the garbage that
the movie. I went and saw the movie, and I enjoyed the movie. And it's just like I loved that book, and I watched the movie, and the personal politics of the creator of that work, it didn't really come into it for me. And some people, they can't separate the art from the artist.
I know. Listen, I'm a huge Neil Adams fan. I've met him tons of times. He's always been great, gracious, warm, friendly. But to hear people talk about him, you think he was a raving lunatic. And, stop. The guy's a great artist. One of the greats. He's right up there. Right up there. Stop with the nonsense.
He has some zany theories, but
so what? Who cares? I'm sure Jack Kirby wasn't all there either.
For me, I don't care about his theories. I do think his actual art style has changed since his heyday. And some of the work that he did on like that last Batman series that he did for DC, Batman Forever, or I don't even remember what it was called. He did an X-Men Forever maybe or something. He did an X-Men series and a Batman series a couple of years ago. And he also wrote them. And I read those, and I'm not going to make the kind of, they weren't my cup of tea, let's say.
Right.
It seemed to me like with some of the character inconsistencies and other kinds of things, it was just like, man, we've got Neil Adams doing a series for us, and the editors were like just scared to death to like tell him to fix something.
Could be.
They figured he'd just like flip them off and go storming out of the office, or maybe he had it worked into his contract that I'll do this series for you, but nobody can edit me and make any changes to my work, which is, in my opinion, really never a good idea for a creator to take that kind of an opinion. It's a lot. If somebody a second set of eyes can like point out things that are a little wonky with your work, it's usually a good idea to take.
Just a sec, like you said, a second set of eyes.
But
But before we forget, I don't know if we can see this. Is that too bright?
Yeah, tilt it a little bit. Oh, that's your iPad. Okay, Batman.
Yeah. We're gonna get into dollar comics.
Dala dala dala.
Now, the interesting thing about dollar comics is that they were very big, 64 pages. Not the first time that big comics have been introduced. I mean, we go way back, you and I. You remember the 100-page Super Spectaculars from back in the day? I think those were only 50 cents, but
50 cents, yeah.
You got a lot of story in those. And if I remember correctly, there was usually a current, a silver, and a golden age story. I'm thinking of stories like the Justice League had some Justice Society and some backup stuff. The Flash. That's the first time I ever saw the Golden Age Flash, was probably in a Super Spectacular. Now, I think that weren't there before that 100-page specials? Like every now and then DC would do a bigger book.
they would do them as just random issues of one of the main titles. You know,
Right.
it'd be like Batman number whatever would be this big issue. And, you know, same thing, Flash would have one, and, you know, whomever. And those were always cool. Like you said, I mean, that was the place where I first saw a lot of these really cool older stories, because, you know, back then there were no trade paperbacks, right?
Right.
So, you know, you didn't get reprints of that kind of stuff unless it was a reprint book like that. You know, Marvel had their Marvel Tales and Marvel Spectacular and things like that we've talked about, that reprinted older stuff. But DC, they would put them into these bigger ones, and then for a while they did those digests too. Remember the DC special blue ribbon digest things that were small. In fact, I got one.
Our double feature continues with martial arts action at its best. A group of students have mastered the art of Kung Fu and put their awesome power to evil use. The 5 Deadly Venoms. Next, here on Channel 5.
People Day. This week, People looks in on Brooke Shields, preteen queen of Pretty Baby. How did a scandalizing role affect this 12-year-old star? People tells you. What was the joke David Brenner told on TV that tangled him in $1.5 million lawsuit? What does William Colby reveal about his life and work in the CIA? People prints it. Can our man Flint light up TV with his new miniseries, The Dane Curse? What did these young Connecticut Yankees find out in the People's Republic of China? People tells you. Take a look at the people in People this week.
Hey, look at that.
Metal
Men. Nice.
And, you know, this is, you know, Best of DC, 100 pages, including the origin. And it's got basically 3 comics in here. And, you know, it's a little smaller, but, you know, heck, this is a little later in time. Let's see what the date is. So this is 1983. So.
Was that a couple bucks for that one?
It was $1.25.
$1.25. Like, that's a good value for that time.
Yeah. And, you know, that's Best of DC, Volume 5, number 34.
Wow.
That's, went on for a while.
Yeah, quite the run there. So, right around, I'd say the 100-page super spectaculars from DC, right around 73, 74. On the other side of the house, on the Marvel side where we were, they were doing what were called giant size. All their flagship titles had, you know, giant size. Well, pretty much all books had them at some point, right?
Yeah.
And giant size man thing.
Yeah, I love that one. Everyone teases about that one. But, you know, you had Invaders and Tomb of Dracula. And Spider-Man, FF, Daredevil, Captain America. And some of them had, it was like the annuals. They started
I was just going to mention that.
They started out with new content. And then by a couple of issues in, they tended to lean heavily on the reprint material. And maybe they would have like one, like kind of like the DC big ones, they'd have one new story and then they'd have a bunch of reprints filling out the rest of the book.
Or just inventory stories from, you know, artists and writers that were trying out. They would just have them do short stories, never publish them, but, you know, that's a deep inventory that they could dig from. And I think that was a good idea at the time because, like you said, there were no resources for back issues. Not really, not for the average kid. So this is the way we learned about the Golden Age, was getting these larger books. Now, the dollar books was a little different. Right around 77, I guess, Ran for about 5-6 years. 64 pages, but the amazing thing was there was no advertising. So,
and all new.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The stuff was fantastic. And I think it came about, that was like right at the heels of the implosion, right?
Right. It came right after the implosion, and it was, for people who didn't know, DC was, they had been running up this promotion of the DC Explosion. And they were going to like be launching all these new series. And then something happened, and I don't remember, it was some business thing or whatnot, and they ended up just, instead of launching all these new books, they just canceled a whole bunch of stuff, and the line really contracted, and people just started calling it the DC Implosion.
Yeah, because it went from, I don't know, I don't even know how many titles were involved, but, let's just, for the sake of numbers, say it went from like 30 titles down to maybe less than a dozen.
Yeah,
it's
like
just
10,
like this.
10 or 11 titles, and they would just combine a whole bunch of things so that it was almost like Marvel back when they were, having to do Tales to Astonish and all those other ones. They could cram 2 different heroes into the same book because DC's distribution would only let them put out like 10 books, right? and that was it. I mean, they compressed back, but they had all this material, so it was actually kind of smart to some extent, because by raising the price on them, you were getting just as good of a deal, because you were getting, like, instead of buying 3 50-cent comics, you were getting 3 50-cent comics worth of material in $1 comic.
Yeah.
So you were getting a deal. DC was, still selling that dollar comic and making more money because it had a higher price on the cover. And it helped them stay afloat for that few years until they kind of recovered and got back to a more normal.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, I think it was the brainchild of Jeanette Kahn. Right when she came aboard in '77, this was her baby, and I think it really did save the company, because you know what? It made it easier for me as a collector, because there were just fewer DC books that I had to grab.
Yeah.
And I could focus a lot on Marvel, because by 77, I was grabbing everything I could get my hands on. I was buying every book that came out, and this just made it a little bit easier. Especially, I've got my iPad open here. I'm looking at a Batman Family dollar comic, and we've got Denny O'Neil, Mike Golden, and Craig Russell. How can you go wrong with that? I mean, that's just good stuff right there.
Yeah, Batman Family and Superman Family.
Yeah.
Were great titles, and it was just, Batman Family, you got, there's a Robin story in there, and there's a Batgirl story in there, and who else do they shoehorn in the Batman family? You have a Batman story, probably.
I'm looking at a Batman story. I'm looking at a Batgirl story. We went from Denny O'Neil and Michael Golden to Bob Rosaskis, which is fine, to a Juan Ortiz and Vince Coletta art.
Woo.
Ooh.
Gear shift, huh?
Yeah, it's a bit of an adjustment.
Did they put things like the Human Target in there?
I'm skimming through. It's been a while.
Man or something?
Wow. Yeah, like Batman, Batgirl, and Robin. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Longer stories than you usually get.
Superman Family used to have Supergirl and Jimmy Olsen and Lois Lane, right?
Oh, we got a Man-Bat story in here, too.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, Supergirl. Nice. Good stuff. This is, wow. Yeah. Yeah, some of my most memorable comic reading came from those dollar comics, especially the Batman Family, because they really kind of hit their stride creatively with that book. it almost felt like there was less pressure to get that book out than it was with the regular books. So it felt like the creators could take their time and craft a really good story. It's DC, so continuity was out the window pretty much. But it was a good solid read, and it was a big chunk of book. It wasn't your typical comic that you just sit down and 7 minutes later it's gone and you're off to the next one. You got a nice good bit of reading right there.
Were you on the DC War books at that point? I don't was GI Combat became a $1 comic, right?
Yeah, actually, it's around here somewhere. But for whatever reason, because of distribution, there were no war books where I was. When I lived a little further south, closer to New York City, when I was younger, you could get war books all day long. But once I moved out to the country, forget it. Once I started getting into the comic shops, then I could start picking them up in back issues. But I'd always enjoyed, GI Combat and, Sergeant Rock, but just could never find them.
What about House of Mystery? Because that one went $1 comic also, right?
Nope. Never read a horror comic until maybe 5 years ago. I was always too scared as a kid. I was the scaredest. Bob, you don't understand. I didn't even like eating Frankenberry cereal because it was the Frankenstein monster on the front. That's how bad it was. I used to have to watch the Munsters to kind of calm me down from the whole concept. It's really kind of sad that I never got to enjoy, Famous Monsters magazine and, all that good horror stuff, and Cain and Abel and House of Mystery. It was too much for me. I remember picking up an issue of
EC, right? If
yeah.
you had gotten your hands on an EC comic,
my head would have exploded.
On the cover.
I remember getting my hands on a copy of a book called Black Magic, which was a DC reprint book.
Yeah,
it was way too much, and it was just a reprint book.
That was from the 50s. Well, that 50s stuff, that was a lot worse in many respects than the kind of watered down stuff that they were making under the Comics Code. I mean,
the Comics Code stuff was almost like gothic horror,
they were mild. I mean, it was until the 70s when they kind of cracked the lid off that and they started doing the black and white magazines.
Oh, too much.
And, Vampire Tales and that kind of stuff. Then they could do some crazy stuff in those. But not in the color books.
If we could take a time machine, you and I, and go back and watch me at the rack and watch me just like kind of freak out when I see Tomb of Dracula and just kind of spin past it.
That was very mild, the Tomb of Dracula.
I know. There was something, I don't know what it was. You know what? When I was really young, I used to watch all those crappy B horror movies as a kid, and the stuff used to just freak me out. And it was like that old Bill Cosby skit. My parents would go out on the weekend. They'd tell the babysitter not to let me watch Chiller Theater. And I would always watch Chiller Theater and just have nightmares just continually. It's definitely an East Coast New York thing. But the opening of Chiller Theater had this 6-fingered hand coming out of a pool of blood. And with this weird music, and it terrified me. But every Friday night I stayed up and watched that crap. And then you watch some piece of garbage like Attack of the 50-Foot Woman or the War of the Colossal Beast, and just go to bed scared. So that small thing kept me away from horror comics for pretty much most of my life, up until maybe 5 years ago.
You can handle him now?
I can handle him now, yeah. I'm a big boy now.
Watch Walking Dead?
Yeah, there you go. Before I forget, it's bitterly cold still. There's no end in sight. We're obviously not going to have spring. We're stuck in an eternal winter here, so I know you were worried about that.
The groundhog, I don't know whether he saw his shadow, whichever one meant another 6 weeks of winter.
Oh, that son of a bitch. I did get to go to an auction.
Little bastard.
I did get to go to an auction this weekend, or last weekend. It's been a while since I've been to one. I went to this one because I knew there was going to be some vintage toys there. I'd seen the pictures in the advertising. So, there was a couple things I wanted to get. And so I go there, go to the preview, look at the stuff that I want to get, look up prices on eBay so I know, what not to pay and, what to offer. And there were two things that I really wanted. One was like a little Batman hat, and the other one was a periscope, a Superman periscope. Both of them vintage. I think the Batman hat was probably mid-60s. The periscope, who knows, early 70s, whatever. So, and there was some other stuff there too. So, watching, the lots are coming up, and there's this couple, an older couple sitting across there. They're bidding on everything. They're just buying everything they can, toy-wise. And there was a lot of toys there. So I was really nervous, because they bid me up on a bunch of Flintstone stuff that I bought. Because the problem with auctions is you get emotional about it, you get attached, and you tend to forget. So my thing was, I'm not letting them take this, so I just kept bidding and bidding and bidding. And then realized that, I probably lost money on this deal, but I better stop now. So I stopped. And then my items came up, the ones that I went there for. And so bidding starts, doesn't go anywhere. I throw my hand up, and I wind up winning. Now, the lot that I won was for $25. The hat, which is this, it's like a little, kind of a beanie type thing, with a little mask on it. Obviously, it's not going to fit on my giant head, but that's pretty cool. That goes for, $30 to $40 on eBay by itself. So that's pretty cool. I guess it's got little tiny ears here. Yeah. Cat ears. And this, I don't know if you can see it. It's a Superman periscope because, even with X-ray vision and heat vision, he still can't see around corners, so.
So the little mirrors are all intact?
Yeah. Thing works great. Just a neat little piece. So I got both of these plus a bunch of other stuff for $25. So that's the kind of thing I wish you were here for, just so you could see what I go through. And I've still been busy. I told you about the other sale that I had with all the Star Wars and G.I. Joe stuff. I'm still selling that stuff. That was $75 investment, and I've probably made back close to $800 so far. So
wow,
I got lucky. And I'm just rolling that back into more stuff, more robots. But this is neat. I like. This is not something you see every day.
Are you gonna keep that, or are you gonna sell it?
I'm gonna keep that. That's going right back there with the older Batman stuff, plus the Superman thing too. Because we had the discussion about me, downsizing, scaling back, and I'm just going to stick to my Trinity, Superman, Batman, and Spider-Man. And
I got to figure out what to do with all those damn X-Men figures like I see behind you on the wall.
Oh, the X-Force stuff? Yeah.
Those are completely worthless.
I know.
And it's just like, I got them cluttered. I got boxes of those things that I never, most of my toys I opened.
Mm-hmm.
So, worthless is worthless, right? It's like, it's pretty much just as worthless mint on the card as it is if you open the damn thing. And it's like, man, it's just taking up space.
Yeah.
But you can't even sell it. It's like, you'd be lucky if you could get $1 for it on eBay. I'm almost thinking of can you donate it to just the Goodwill shop and claim it as $5 a piece tax deduction, you know, and you'd get like $2 off of it, which is more than you would get selling it. And it's
it's weird because we've been doing this for so long. It's getting to a weird age. Like, I'm looking over here at some DC superhero stuff by Toy Biz, which is, what, 89, right?
Yeah.
That's getting up there in age. Now, I don't think about it because I see it every day, but this stuff is really old. And the X-Force stuff is...
I've got that stuff too, and it's like... But again, I don't have most of it. Almost all my toys we took out of the cards. You know, I have some of the X-Men stuff because there was just so damn much of it. I just don't have. I still have some of it on the cards, but I've looked it up on eBay and it's relatively worthless. You know, and I even some old Spider-Man ones that are on the card still, the Toy Biz ones. You know, Punisher with like you know the one with like. You run the roll of caps through him, and, you know.
Bob, I got a whole room full of that.
they go for $2 if you're lucky.
Yeah, I know.
Like, it's just taking up space.
I think what my thinking is on that is I'm going to wait it out. It's not intrusive into my regular life downstairs, so it's just kind of fine here. But, you know, I know at some point it'll go. I don't know if the kids want it or, you know, maybe give it to their... who knows? But, I don't know what I was thinking.
But, you know, the thing is, like, to me, you could put something on that wall space that's much cooler than that.
Yeah. No, I could literally take this whole third floor and spread out my Batman collection to where you can see things.
Yeah, I mean, that stuff's, to me, it's a lot cooler than, you know.
What, you would rather see... You'd rather see this than GW Bridge?
Say no offense to the Toy Biz X-Men figures, but that's not true because I don't care if I offend those crappy Toy Biz X-Men figures. They're terrible. They're like very low articulation, you know. It's just... Do you remember like the very first statues that Marvel came out with? The porcelain Wolverine and Punisher and Spider-Man. You remember those? They were on the wooden base.
No. Do you have one?
They're made of... Yeah, I've got them.
Go get one. I'll vamp.
I don't have them out. I don't even know.
Oh, okay.
They're in a box somewhere. I mean, they're terrible looking. I mean, they're very crude. And I don't know, back then they were like $40 or something, and they're still like $40. I mean, it's just like... I'll find one on eBay. I'll send you a link. You can see what it looks like.
Well, one of the interesting things I have going on here, and maybe I'll put up some pictures, but right next to my mini X-Force collection is the Marvel Legends collection. And it's amazing what a matter of a few years will make in terms of what these action figures look like. You know, I've got a Gideon action figure next to Black Panther, and it's like night and day, literally.
Okay, here I'm gonna send you a eBay link. This is gotta buy it now. It's from 1991. Marvel Spider-Man bisque porcelain 7-inch statue. It's got the box. It's just like it looks exactly like it did when I bought it. It's got a wooden base with a little brass plaque on it. You can buy it mint in box right now, $35.
And that thing is almost 25 years old.
Yeah. And you know, I've got it. But it was one of the first statues that came out. And for that, maybe it's just it's not old enough to be nostalgic, or the people aren't nostalgic for something like this, or I don't know what the deal is with it, but it's never turned into something that was.
Well, let's not get too far afield here, but all of this stuff, all of this crap you see behind me, that's all early 90s stuff. And you got to remember what the comic industry was like back then, too.
Yeah.
So, I was buying this as a toy collector, but I would imagine that there were a lot of guys that were not only speculating on comics, but they were speculating on comic-related stuff like this.
Maybe.
When I go to garage sales in the state, you see a lot of this stuff. There's a lot of it out there, and it just hit me that that's probably the reason why it's worthless as it is.
Around the 90s, it's not even just speculation, but even when somebody bought something then, it was very common for people to keep the packaging and keep it in perfect condition and not playing with it out in the dirt. And,
right.
That's why, you get something from the 60s, and if you get like a really nice condition box with it, or it's like in really, that's unusual, right? Because almost everybody played with their toys. But in the 90s, it was like everyone was, same thing with comics, right? There are so many 90s comics that were printed, and almost everyone, I won't say everyone, but so many of them ended up bagged and boarded and saved right away, that a lot of those didn't really, they're all still around, they're all still in really nice condition. When you read your comic in 1970, you read your comic and you fold it in half and stick it in your pocket.
You read it and reread it.
And you read it 20 times, and then it would lay on your nightstand or on the coffee table, and it wasn't read once and then put away. And by the 90s, when there were comic shops, I knew a lot of people that would buy 2 copies of everything.
Yep.
They would buy one, and they'd be. You ever see the movie Clerks?
Yeah.
Where the guy is Walt Flanagan sitting looking for the perfect egg by the refrigerator.
Oh my God! Yeah.
Movie. You would have the guys. There would be guys in my comic shop, and I'm sure you saw them. You worked in a who'd be like looking at every single comic and trying to find the most beautiful, perfect comic, and it would go right in a bag and a board. They'd buy a second one, and that's the one that they would read. And then that one would also go in a plastic bag, but it's now like very fine.
That was the demise of the spin rack, because the way that I used to look at books in a spin rack, you flip the books down, and they would always be bent right around the staple level. Who cared? You were there to buy them,
Yeah.
But now, like you said, these guys would come in, and we did have some spinners there, so they would get the books that were further in the back, take them out, examine them, and I think probably a year or two after that, we had to switch to like the regular magazine type racks, where the books could, stand up flatter or lay down flatter on the bottom shelf like I've got over there. But, I just distinctly remember, and I still do it on the rack behind me to this day if I'm looking for something, because the books that I fill up in there are just, they're readers. I want people to come in and, pick up a book and flop themselves in a chair and then read. So I'll go up and just flip through just the way we used to, I don't get up and down on my knees as much as I used to.
Yeah.
So the books on the bottom are a little less read than the ones at eye level.
There are a lot of people who are incredibly fussy about condition. And I went through a phase like that myself, and maybe it has to do, I don't know whether it's an age or just how long you've been collecting. But I know older guys who are like that too. I think the more limited you are, if you're only going to collect like a very small number of things, or you just get this one thing, you get like really mental about upgrading the condition and getting the most perfect one of everything. And I just kind of want the thing. I don't care if it's, I'd see guys that go on Facebook and they like put a CGC book up and say, oh, I love this book, but man, it's in rough condition and it's like a 6.0. And it'd be like, man, that would be like the highest condition of something that I would get these guys. And it's like a book from like the 60s and it's like CGC 6.0. And they're like, oh yeah, but it's in not that great a shape. It's only a 6.0. And I'm like, seriously?
How, what percentage of your collection would you say you've, wow.
I'm happy with this book and it's a 3.0, right?
That's very nice. It's beautiful.
Nice. It's really nice. It's got a nice seam and, it's very early Thor. It's 87. So, that's...
He's prisoner of the Reds.
Yeah.
Those stinking commies.
It's, like, 4 issues into Thor, right? Started in 83, right?
Yep. Look at that. That's nice.
Fifth appearance.
Holy cow.
And, and then I got this one, which is Iron Man.
Nice.
4. So that's like 8 issues or so into Iron Man. And it's a 4.5. And again, that's like the upper end of like, man, it's pretty nice to me when it's a 4.5 from back there.
Yeah. As long as the cover's not falling off.
I get depressed. I like quit that Facebook group today, actually.
Did you?
There were so many people that have got to be dealers. They just put up like pictures of, they've got 6 copies of this book from the 1950s. And it's like, oh, look at these that I've got. And it's like, they got 6 of them. It's like, what? It's like, seriously? And
that's
it's like
ridiculous.
They do this all the time. And then they're always coming on with these little comments about, oh yeah, here's my 6.0 and it's not quite good enough for my high standards. It's like, those are not my kind of people, It's like, I just feel like if I put up a picture of my 3.0, it's just like, who's this punk, that's like, who dares sully our group with a 3.0 copy of a book from 50 years ago.
That's crazy. So, what percentage of your collection have you replaced, if any? I'm like, so you started around when I did. Did you go back and upgrade your books, or are they pretty much the way they are when you read them?
99 point. I have so many books, right? So percentages will lie. Virtually all my books are what I bought, right?
See, I like that.
I replaced the Spider-Mans that I cut the, there were ones that I cut the paper dolls out of and stuff. We've talked about that.
We got to come up with a better term than paper dolls.
Yeah, I know. And then I have my 2-dimensional action figures.
There you go.
And, I probably have mentioned before that I had the bright idea of 3-hole punching a big run of Spider-Man to put into a 3-ring binder and keep it really nice, And I replaced those before they were sky-high price. So, I didn't even replace all my books that I cut the Marvel value stamps out of. My Hulk 181 missing the Marvel value stamp, so that makes it essentially worthless.
But I think this goes again back to my theory that comics are very personal. Let's just say your Hulk 181 with the stamp cut out versus a newer Hulk 181. I think there's just going to be more of an emotional attachment to your original book.
Yeah.
That just goes without saying.
Plus, it's just like if I wouldn't go out and spend, now it's so expensive a book, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would rather take the money that somebody else might spend and saying, oh, well, I've got this good or good minus, because mine is in nice shape except for the fact that I cut the value stamp out, but it's like good minus or whatever, probably a 1.5 or 2 with the value stamp. Even though that issue, I don't think it affects story. There's a couple of those value stamp ones that wasn't just an ad on the other side.
Right.
Cut out but
Bobby Van is your host for great comedy game show fun on Make Me Laugh. Don't miss it tomorrow night at 8, right here on 11 Alive.
In the past year, over 1,000 people have made the smart move to Sterrett City. It's almost sold out. Listen to what these people like best about living here.
It's lovely here. Lots of trees. It's safe. It really works.
When I saw this place with big rooms and parquet floors, I said, this is too good to be true.
I could play tennis, go swimming. It's really great.
I like walking to school. It's close to my building.
Everything is included in the rent. Gas, electricity, and air conditioning. You get the most for your money.
I can do all my shopping right outside my door.
Sterrett City was nice in the commercial, but it's even nicer now that I'm living here.
I wouldn't trade this place for anything.
Sterrett City is almost sold out, but you can still get your chance if you call now. For an appointment to see model apartments, call 245-3535. That's 245-3535. Call now, even if you're just thinking of moving.
It's the smartest move we ever made.
But, so, I look at that as, if I'm going to spend hundreds, or in that Hulk 181, $1,000 or something, buying that comic book again, before I would do that, I would rather take that $1,000 and buy the first appearance of Ant-Man.
Right.
I don't have, So instead of upgrading a book, I would rather just be happy with what I've got and
just
go
expand
buy
the collection.
Something else that I don't have. But that's me. I mean, other people, they are made happy by having the highest grade, most monetarily valuable collection. And if that makes them happy, then that's cool, right? I mean, you collect to make yourself happy. I mean, there's really no actual purpose for any of this junk that we accumulate other than to make us happy, right? It's not feeding us. It's not,
I'm going to turn the speakers down because you've just pissed off everybody in the room. It's okay, guys. It's all right.
It makes us happy, right? So what makes you happy is what you need to pursue and what you collect.
Exactly. What do you think a good number of people, our collection started in the 70s, and I think we're both at the point, you're still buying new books, but I've slowed down, but I am working my way backwards, dabbling more and more in the 50s stuff. Do you think that's ever going to catch on, or is that just something for us old timers?
There are certain people who like that stuff. I mean, I think I can't predict on the 50s stuff, but if there's still good prices, I think that there's a mixed group there. I think 50s is still gonna have maybe a decline for a period of time, because there's still some guys who are 10 years older than us out there who are actually buying stuff that, the way we feel about the 60s.
Right.
It's right before we got into collecting, and we want to, there's guys who they're hardcore into the 50s and the 40s the way we feel about the 60s and the 70s. And those guys are going to die. And we're going to hopefully still be around. And that will thin out the... and then it just... Once we kick the bucket, then it'll just be a more open field for... And I don't know, I mean, on the stuff like the Western and the romance and that kind of stuff, I can't predict the future, but I don't see that stuff having a resurgence of, pop culture fascination.
Yeah,
so
I'm
once
just wondering
the
if
old guys who dig it are gone, I can't see people spending, unless they all of a sudden start making, like maybe the superhero thing runs its course 15 years from now, and the hottest movie in the theaters is the Rawhide Kid, or there's like some really kick-ass version of Millie the Model, that's like makes $1 billion and like some 3D smell-o-vision, where you come out of it with your hair in a beehive hairdo or something. Unless something like that happens, I can't. Once the crop of people who are into this stuff, I don't see that stuff holding.
That is scary.
Because look at it even now. I mean, I was looking for a while. I got interested in the Western Ghost Rider.
Mm-hmm.
And I was trying to pick, and he was in a lot of comic books. I mean,
Was he?
I did some research on it.
Wow.
He didn't have his own title, but he was like backup. And Frank Frazetta did issues of, did Ghost Rider stories in various things, and lots of really, well-regarded artists. But as I looked into it, I'm buying those books, and like low condition ones. I mean, you're paying like $30-$40 a piece for like 2.5, 3.0, 3, not that bad, But even that, I can't see, that's not something that is like a general. Someone's not going to drop $35, that kind of a thing. Who's going to do that, right? I am, but after I'm gone, is my kid going to do that? Because you and I are both, we're like about as young as you can get, where you still have that nostalgia for a lot of the Western shows, because they weren't first run, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they were some of the only stuff that was on in reruns on, the off channels that you'd be watched. I used to watch Gunsmoke and Bonanza and The Lone Ranger and Rawhide, Have Gun, Will Travel, Branded, right? There
Big
were a
Valley.
bunch of Westerns that were made in the 50s that we still watched in the 60s and 70s.
Yep.
But are kids today watching those in any kind of, they're on like certain channels they'll be on, but I think mostly old folks.
Listen, I still watch The Rifleman while I'm making dinner, and I love that show. I love it. I was the only guy when I went to see the first Ghost Rider movie, and they had the 50s Ghost Rider show up. I was the only one in the theater that knew it. And I was like, yeah! My wife is like, what are you talking about? That's the original Ghost Rider, not that idiot on a motorcycle.
So, that's is that going to be popular? I think that the Marvel stuff will hold, right? The 60s Marvel stuff is going to hold, and it's, with all the movies right now, it's just going up, up, up.
Right.
But the 50s stuff, I think if you go for 50s stuff, the stuff that will probably appreciate in the 50s is your EC books.
Right.
And things like that have got a certain cachet around that. I've picked up issues of, like ACG books, it's like there is a lot of comedy. You get like Rula the Jungle Girl, and like something. And, I got like some book from like 1952 that's not in great shape, but I paid like $12 for it or something. It's just like next to nothing. Or I was picking up issues of Airboy.
Wow, that's right. That's right. I remember that. Yeah.
Which was Hillman,
Mhm.
right? For, 20 to $40. I mean, they're in good, very good condition. I'd say anywhere between 2.0 and 4.0, 4.5, and I'm paying 20, 30, maybe $40 for them. I mean, it's and these are books that are well earlier, but there's not that many people that are buying them, and it's like, to me, I'm probably paying a local maximum price because 10 years from now, whatever old dude that I'm bidding against that's 10 years older than me, he's going to be gone maybe, and he's not bidding me up on those things.
Yeah, it's interesting because what are the kids that started collecting in the 90s? The kids that think that Venom is the ultimate character, that they love him. Do they just keep going for it, or do they go back to the real old stuff back in the 70s?
You look at the kind of money that gets paid for, like, Deadpool, for instance. I never got Deadpool. It was never my cup of tea, and there are people who are just, like, really, really hardcore into Deadpool, right?
I just don't give a shit about Deadpool, to be honest.
But boy, that's a series that I never really bought, and it's something from the 90s where most books from the 90s, I mean, it's like if I say I have, like, pretty much all the Marvel comics, well, I don't have anywhere near all the Deadpool comics. But most of the other Marvel 90s books that I didn't have, including the X-Men from the 90s, I bought for $1 or less an issue. Maybe there were a couple issues when I was buying them 10 years ago, when I got back into that after taking a 10-year hiatus from...
Yeah.
I was still buying comics, but not everything. And I was trying to fill in a lot of that 90s Marvel stuff. And I got, like, every issue of Avengers that I didn't buy, and Captain America, and Iron Man, and FF, and...
FF in the 90s. Oh, my God.
I mean, they were terrible. It's just,
but you know what? I probably...
My cup of tea. I think there are certain things that are intrinsically terrible. You can... and 90s Marvel books, although you can't even say that, because the kids who got into comics in the 90s think that stuff is like just the cat's meow.
Yeah, Sue Richards is Malice. That's all I have to say about that.
Sue Richards is Malice, and everyone in the Avengers had a short brown leather jacket, and there were pouches everywhere on everybody, and guns that were like so large that you needed superpowers just to physically lift them up. It's just crazy. But anyway, Deadpool. I didn't buy any of those. And when I went back and I was buying all these other Marvel comics for, just nothing, just filling in, you couldn't get the Deadpools. I mean, they were always, $5, $10 a piece on a lot of those books. And it's like, there's no way I'm paying $5 or $10 for a Deadpool comic book, and now they're still holding, because there's a lot of people who dig Deadpool, and a lot of those prices have gone up.
Do you think he's just going to be one of those characters that's just going to wind up on, every T-shirt, every lunchbox, like the Hulk and Iron Man? Because my kids talk about Deadpool, and they're not really into comics. I mean, they know it peripherally from the movies and just from living here, but they know Deadpool, the merc with the mouth.
Enough people like Deadpool that he's just something that people talk about.
It's
like
weird.
The younger crowd likes Deadpool, and they're making that movie, right? They're making a new Deadpool movie that I keep seeing articles like Marina Baccarin is going to be Domino in it.
Really?
Yeah. That's,
Oh, man, I'm going to be the old guy at the movie. That's no superhero.
Who's playing Deadpool? I don't even remember. It didn't make any impression.
Ryan Reynolds did it before, but I don't know who's going to do it now. I don't know. It's just interesting.
I really don't care. It's like
the next time you're in a comic shop, I want you to talk to somebody who got into collecting in the 90s, and I want to know what their plans are. I want to know, are they going to keep collecting forever? Because most collectors do. They go for as long, well, they think they do until life gets in the way. But I want to know, do they have any plans on looking back to the past? Because that to me is interesting. I mean, can you... Because I really do feel that comics have become more and more sophisticated every decade that goes by. The books that are being written now are nothing like the books that are from 10 years ago or even 10 years before that. So I'm wondering if the guy that started collecting in the 90s, does he look at the books from the early 80s and just go, ew, ugh, I can't read that the way that I kind of poo-pooed certain Golden Age books when I was a kid.
Yeah, maybe. Although I think certain characters, if you have the for us, right? You poo-pooed the books in the 50s because there was no
superheroes
spread.
Right.
Right. Well, I mean, there was like pretty much around the early 60s, late 50s for DC, there was a splitting point, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the things that you love, they only trace back a certain distance. And then beyond that, it's something that is very foreign.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas someone who was reading books in the 90s, you can trace back the roots of that all the way back into the 60s.
True.
And even if you don't even want to go all the way to the 60s, at least into the 70s, you know, like hell, if you're reading and you dig, you know, like Power Man and Iron Fist, well, you got to go back in the 70s to get Hero for Hire, right?
Yeah.
And Marvel Premiere with the first appearances of Luke Cage, and now they're giving another shot to Master of Kung Fu. So people who like start digging on that, that's actually a whole extra thing because they can't reprint any of that stuff. So, you know, we've talked about that before.
Yeah.
You know, so people have to go back and collect that stuff if they want.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's some 70s stuff and 80s too that I think has a potential for, you know, with the boomers going back, like Marvel's G.I. Joe, Marvel's Transformers, Rom's Space Knight, Godzilla, you know, these licensed properties that Marvel no longer has the license for. Right? If somebody wants a lot, I mean, some of them they get reprinted, you know, by whomever, you know, has the current license, but someone like people who are right now getting hardcore into Star Wars because the new movies and the revitalization that now Marvel has Star Wars back. If they don't want to be satisfied with just reading reprints, I think that going back and getting the original 106 issue run of Star Wars for Marvel, those are going to go up in value.
Yeah.
Almost guaranteed. You know, now that Marvel has the rights to that back. Now, will those people give any thought to or care about any of the Star Wars books that were done by Dark Horse? Don't know.
Remains to be seen.
Maybe it's just like, that stuff didn't happen. You know, it's like, I'm going to get the Marvel. So, you know, it's interesting of what will excite people. If you could predict that, it's that crystal ball kind of a thing, you know. G.I. Joe went through a phase where it was really hot, I remember. That's G.I. Joe is one of the few comics I ever sold.
Really?
Do you remember back in the... I don't remember when G.I. Joe first came out. Was it the 90s or was it the 80s?
80s. Early 80s.
At some point, G.I. Joe got mega popular.
Oh, yeah.
And the you love G.I. Joe.
Mm-hmm.
And I had bought like the first 8 or 10 issues of the Marvel G.I. Joe comic.
Issue 2 was the hot issue. For whatever reason. Not issue 1, issue 2.
But at some point, those comics were all getting very expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to get some ungodly amount of money at the time from my shop in trade. I mean, it was like $50 or $60.
Oh, wow.
For, you know, this 10 issues, or maybe it was 12 issues
Mm-hmm.
of G.I. Joe. And I'm like, okay, here, because I had stopped buying it. I only bought it for, you know, the first 10 or 12 issues.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, not my cup of tea, because I never played with the toys.
Right.
I never watched the cartoon. It just, I had no interest in it, and I got rid of them. That was one of the only times I ever actually sold something out of my collection.
Wow. Huh. I'm trying to think if I've ever... I mean, I've sold off doubles, but I don't think I've ever just, you know, surgically removed a title from my collection that I can remember. You know what? I take that back. I may have given stuff away or donated it if it's a storyline that I just had no interest in, was no longer going to collect it. I'll just, here, take these books, read them, give them a good home. But
Right.
it's probably some decent. I don't even remember.
I was, I don't have them at hand here. I can grab them really quick. I'll show you something.
And we'll be right back after these messages. Put this on.
This might be one of the only instances where I bought multiple issues of something that might actually be worth something. And it's not worth a lot, but there was a period of time when I would buy, so...
Holy cow!
So these are extras. I had 4 of them. I only had one extra of this one.
I've got extras of that one.
For some reason, I have 5 extra copies of this one. And this was like, I was going through boxes. Tasha gave me another list. They're doing the Bronze Age DC book.
Oh, what? Really?
And, you know, they're breaking it because they did a Golden Age and a Silver Age. Now they're doing Bronze Age. So they gave me a big list of books to pull for them for that. So as I was going through the boxes, I mean, if I was going through the box and I found duplicates like this, I just pulled them out. And for duplicates that are worth nothing, I just give them away. These, I think I looked this up, and it's like a $10 or $15 book. So I might try to eBay those. But
you know what? There's something about that book. I remember buying it. I remember sitting in my car and reading it the first time. And I remember reading Teen Titans at the same time and X-Men, but I don't remember anything else that was going on in the comic world other than those 2 titles.
Well, those were the top big time. I mean, Frank Miller, Daredevil,
Frank Miller at his peak.
You know, good stuff.
Yeah.
And I immediately cooled on him when he went over to DC and did Ronin. And I'm like, seriously?
Oh my God, I forgot about that book. Yes.
Sorry for bringing up that painful memory.
I was working in the comic shop at that time, and I was like, what the hell is this? What is this mess?
It was like, everyone was high on Frank Miller because of Daredevil, and it's like, little did we know that this was not a, because did Ronin come after Dark Knight?
No, I think it was before Dark Knight.
Okay, so at least he redeemed himself with Dark Knight.
Yeah.
That was like a local maximum, because then he went on to do Dark Knight Returns and then that horrible Spirit movie. But I mean, 300 is good. So.
Wow, you know what? You come to think of it, I was a huge Frank Miller fan early on. I remember seeing him in I think it was Marvel Team Up with Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, and Karma.
Yep.
And
it was like, an annual, I think.
Yeah, and I think
I have his first comics work was an issue of I think Star Spangled War Stories.
Wow.
Like the war that time forgot, some like giant pterodactyls or something in it.
He did a backup story in a magazine that I remember too. Just some guy being followed by these other two shadowy figures. What the hell was it? Bizarre Adventures, maybe? I don't know. It was some Marvel black and white magazine, and it was just a little short story, and it was really good. And I was like, this guy knows what he's doing. He's got a very cinematic style.
Stuff. He did that. Remember that Silent Night kind of Christmas Batman story?
Yes.
Classic.
Yeah.
He did some really good work, and then he did Ronin. That's the way I classify Frank Miller's comic work. He did like a lot of really, really fabulous stuff, and Ronin. That was when I knew that the DC Absolute editions had jumped the shark. When they got around to doing an Absolute edition of Ronin.
Oh, God.
Seriously? You're doing an Absolute edition of Ronin.
Elektra lives.
So,
I remember waiting for that book for years, only to be disappointed.
Yeah, well, certain times you get like something that's so good. How are they going to live up to that? I mean, Dark Knight Returns, and then that Dark Knight Strikes Again was just it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't Dark Knight Returns.
I tried to read it and couldn't get through it. Gave it some time, I don't know, maybe 10 years or whatever it was. Tried to read it again recently and I just couldn't get through it. I don't know what it was. It felt out of place, kind of. It felt like more of the same. It's like, all right, you did Dark Knight, move on. But this was just,
It was okay.
It was all right, but it just didn't. There was something missing, and I could never put my finger on what, because I can pretty much read anything, but there's a handful of books that I've just never been able to get through, and unfortunately that's one of them. So,
if you read a lot of stuff, you'll find a lot more stuff that you just can't read, I'm sure. I experienced that with almost DC's entire line 9 months ago. I mean, I could not get my way through a single one of their superhero books.
Now, isn't that like the strangest feeling now? You're sitting there and you're looking at this book and you're just really, you're struggling just to kind of to take it in, and it's just not going in. And then
it's like I can't read every panel. It's like your mind is wandering.
Yeah, exactly.
In the back of your mind, just like, when is this going to be over? It's just like, and you're reading this stuff for enjoyment. And when I get that feeling, it's just like, I'm done. I can't. But it's not a bad comic, because I know a lot of people who love those comics.
Mm-hmm.
So it's my taste as applied to that comic makes it a bad comic for me,
mm-hmm.
but somebody else, that exact same comic could be the greatest comic they ever read, and the thing that reaffirmed their, love for comics.
But the problem with me is I always juxtapose it to when I was younger, and I would read everything, and I mean everything. If I saw an issue of Sad Sack, sitting on a table at the barbershop, I could read that, and I would read it, and I would read it a couple of times. But for me to be able to do that and not be able to read this book as an adult is just like, there is some kind of weird disconnect in this guy's story that I just can't. I'm sorry. I'm going to have to put you down.
I think that there's a certain, when they do the kind of, you mentioned it earlier, they have a lot more complex storytelling, right? I mean, back then, any book was written in a far more simplistic fashion. Most books. I won't say all books.
Right.
Like I would argue that like your Denny O'Neil, Neil Adams, Green Lantern, Green Arrow stuff was not a simplistic book, even though it was done in an earlier day. Or even Lee and Kirby's Fantastic Four was, it was a pretty meaty book, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But there were a lot of books that were fairly lightweight. And you could read that kind of book and not, you could read it. It's not going to be like, oh my God, I can't make my way through this book. I'm guessing you could probably pick up a, Garfield comic that comes out from Boom Studios or something, and it might not be the greatest comic you ever read, but you could make your way through it. But on the other hand, I will pick up certain Grant Morrison comics where he's being particularly obtuse, in my opinion. And I cannot read these books. But then there are other people who they think these are just works of art. There are people who write entire books, scholarly books, on how to read and analyze Grant Morrison, The Invisibles, or whatever. And, there will be, Grant Morrison writes some comic book, and there's a website that is, people tell you how to read this comic and actually get all the layered stuff that Grant crams into that comic book. And those people are getting the best value for their comic book dollar that is available on the market today, because they are paying $4 for this comic book, and they are spending 5 hours analyzing it and reading websites, and and man, they got a tremendous amount of entertainment for that money. I look at that and it's just like, I don't want to deal with this. I'm reading a comic book because I want to escape from the world where I have to study software engineering process and how to analyze this batch of requirements and help turn them into the best product down the line. And I'm thinking about this stuff at work and when I'm doing all these things, and the last thing I want to do is have to do deep analysis of a comic book.
You just want to see Jughead get away from Big Ethel. That's all.
I want to see. I mean, and it's not to say that I only like really simplistic comics.
No. That's we understand
I like
that.
what Jonathan Hickman did with the Fantastic Four, and I like the layered storytelling. But there is a way that some writers will do layered storytelling that is relatively easy to follow, and then there are others, Grant Morrison, that will do stories that same way that are, at least to the way my mind works, very difficult for me to make my way through them. Well, and again, that's me reading that book, and It's not everybody reading that book, because good example, he recently put out a new book called The Nameless, or maybe it's just Nameless, a #1 issue that came out from Image. And I read it, and it was okay. I mean, it was another one of these that had I'm sure there was a lot more going on in it that I just didn't want to deal with. And to me, it was like, I don't need to read that book. But again, I go on forums and there are people that this is the most brilliant comic that they've read all year. And, that's great. Knock themselves out. And that's, I'm glad that book is being published for some segment of the public to read and enjoy that intensely. And then I'll turn around and I'll read, something like, what one's like very different from that? Try to think, staying in the image thing, I'll read Invincible, for instance, and it's like just a fairly mindless superhero romp, it's got story in it and it's, characterization and things, but I mean it's not like what I would consider to be a deep layered read, and other people will read that book and they can't stand it. It's like, that's fine. I'm glad that they published this book and they published that one over there and they published,
that's why just like you said before, we need variety. You got to cast the bigger net.
There's a whole bunch of books that I personally don't care for that a lot of people I know and respect, they love those books. Hickman's East of West. I tried to get into it a number of times. It's lost on me. Mm-hmm. But I know people who think that's the most brilliant book that's out there. And it's like, I'm glad that book is there for you. And I have this other stuff over here that you don't necessarily like, but, it's there for me.
Cool.
It's good stuff. I like the variety,
All right. Well, let's wrap this up. It's getting late. And even though it's the weekend, I'm a little tired. Because it's almost midnight here where we are. And it's getting chilly. So
doesn't no time warp created by all the snow?
Unfortunately not. Wow, we've had a really good discussion tonight. But we've barely even talked about your website.
ComicSpectrum.com. I did a couple of blogs this week that people might like. I did one called something on the order of where to find comics in a Comic-Con. Might actually be a topic we could talk about sometime. Mm-hmm. I toyed with calling it, "Hey, who put the comics in my Comic-Con?"
I like that.
People who like to go to Comic-Cons and just get autographs from Hollywood celebrities and see wrestlers.
Hey, these stupid comics are getting in the way of my cosplay.
Yeah, I was prompted to do this when I got a press release from the Heart of Texas Con. Wow. And I went to the website and I could not find a single thing related to an actual printed comic book anywhere on the website.
Wow.
There were wrestlers, there were cosplayers, there were celebrities, TV show this, movie that. I could not find a single thing to do with a comic book. Now,
that's scary.
Maybe they just haven't gotten around to putting that other stuff up yet. But I started thinking, man, that's weird. And I started looking at some other cons. And it was a really interesting journey as I looked at about 6 or 8 cons that I talk about in the thing. And it's like some of them are very comic oriented. Some of them have a lot of great comic guests, but they're, a page and a half scrolling through the media guests. And then they have the comic creators. So you know where their emphasis is. Sometimes the comic creators go on top. Sometimes they have a page for cosplayers and a page for media and a page for comic creators. And, you can pick which one you want to look at. And it's got all of them. And I don't mind that. It's just like, but what I guess what I determined was that most conventions not everyone. You have to look at it. Most of them actually do have comic books. You just have to try to look and find out where they're hidden. Sometimes they're back behind the boiler on sub-basement level 3, but they're there.
Oh, so sad that stigma still exists. All right, buddy. I will talk to you soon. Thanks to everybody for watching. And being that this is a Saturday episode, we did this one Saturday night, almost into Sunday morning. I'll have this one done probably early tomorrow. So, and then we'll try to get back on a regular schedule. You know, barring anything ridiculous happening like snowpocalypse.
Snowpocalypse 2015.
That's right. Living large in Albany. All right. We'll talk to you soon, buddy.